You're listening to the Business for Good podcast, the show where you'll hear inspirational stories about companies making money by solving some of the world's most pressing problems. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and I'm glad you've joined us. Welcome, friend, to episode 150 of the Business for Good podcast. You know, when I started this podcast in 2018, the idea of releasing 150 episodes certainly was not on my mind, and I'm gratified that the show has become a valuable asset for a lot of listeners. As I mentioned on the last episode, the Business for Good podcast is now in the top 1% of podcasts globally by popularity, which means there is a good number of people getting something out of the show, hopefully inspiring them to do something in their own lives to help solve pressing social problems. So, 150 episodes in, please let me say thank you to each of you for listening. You are the reason the show exists, and I'm grateful to you for subscribing to the show, for sharing your favorite episodes with friends, for leaving reviews online for the show, and more. You have made the show what it is, and I'm glad that it's useful for you. In that vein, I'm confident that this episode will be an inspirational one for you, since I know I certainly was inspired by our guest. So, you've heard of fruit leather, but what about making leather from fruit? Or more precisely, feeding fruit waste like mango pulp to bacteria, which then convert those sugars into a leather-like material that can be used for all types of purposes. That's exactly what Polybion, a startup in central Mexico, is doing. Co-founded in 2015 by two brothers with a passion for using biology to save humanity from ourselves, as their CEO Axel Gómez-Ortigoza puts it, Polybion has pioneered methods of turning the fruit industry's trash into what they hope will be their treasure. As you'll hear in this episode, Polybion has methods for treating fruit waste to make it an economic feedstock in their fermentation system to grow cellulose into a leather-like material that they call Celium. Already, the company has partnered with fashion companies eager to put Celium into their menu of offerings. To sustainably feed and clothe ourselves into the future, it is imperative that we no longer go big with animal agriculture, but instead go small with microbial agriculture. Will Polybion's cellulose leather be a part of the solution? Time will tell. But for now, enjoy hearing the wild ride this company's been on from conception to pivoting technologies to now getting a product out onto the market. I'll let Polybion CEO Axel tell you their story. Axel, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Hey, Paul.
Hey, I am so glad to be talking to you. Greetings from California to Mexico. Where in Mexico are you right now?
Likewise. We're located in central Mexico, a state called Guanajuato, and that's where we're based.
Very cool. Well, we're going to get into why you're based there and all of that, but I'm so eager to hear. I just have to ask, you started this company 9 years ago with your brother. What's the inspiration for you? Like, why were you thinking that you wanted to do something that would replace leather or have new materials? Like, what happened 9 years ago that you're thinking in Mexico, I think I need to do something about leather?
Yeah, I'm going to step back a little and go to give a little context. So the story actually begins, at least the way I see it, 3 generations ago with my grandfather, he was an engineer and was the first generation of people who attended Tecnológico de Monterrey, which is one of the most important private school in Mexico for engineers in northern Mexico, Monterrey. And with that, then my father also was a biochemical engineer, and then I'm a biotech engineer from that school. So I think that's how it started. Also, me and my brothers were very lucky to grow up in a family which my father was a serial entrepreneur back in the 80s when entrepreneurs weren't a thing and VC didn't exist basically. And he actually built computers here in central Mexico and bought the software from none other than Bill Gates a long time ago, the MS-DOS before Windows even. So it's a cool story. So I think that's how it started. And then since I was very young, I also was surrounded by nature, as you can imagine, Mexico being the fourth most biodiverse country on the planet. And so since I was very young, I foresaw that biotech was going to be crucial and also foresaw the problem that climate change was going to impose in our generation. And since I was young, I thought that I wanted to do a startup, of course, and I wanted to be a biotech startup. So when I was studying in the last year of my bachelor in biotech engineer, I went to MIT for iGEM, which is a synthetic biology competition it used to be held at MIT. Now they changed the venue, but it's like a competition between universities where they basically propose projects that solve industrial problems using biotechnology or synthetic biology, genetic engineering. And while I was attending there, I was sitting in listening to Cornell's team project, and they were actually working with Ecovative, which you might know from mycelium technology. Back in the day, this was 2013. So it was very young company in Ecovative, and it wasn't very well known either. Mycelium materials were not a thing yet. And so that coincided with the fact that I was talking to Alexis, who is my brother, my co-founder, and we were talking like we want to do this like a biomaterial company. We were exploring different biomaterials like chitin from like sea like crab shells and insect shells, exoskeletons, and also mycelium. We had read about like an article about the very early Ecovative material, and we thought it was great. But then this coincided with the fact that I was sitting there and they passed around a little piece of material, mycelium material from Ecovative. And as long as I touched this material, I said like, this is what I need to do. Like this is going to be something very interesting for humans, right? So I came back, I graduated from the engineering, and then I came back to Central Mexico where we were actually born. And Alexis and myself decided to build this company with our co-founder Barbara, she's a material science PhD. She has a lot of experience, like 40 or 50 years in academia and industry. And back then we started the company with a grant from the government, from Guanajuato government. The state government gave us a very small grant, nothing compared to what they give in the US. But with that, we kickstarted the company, and that's how it started. As I told you, we first started with mycelium actually, and then we shifted to leather because we foresaw a lot of problems with mycelium that I can get deeper into if you like.
I definitely would like to get into that. But first, I want to mention, you mentioned your grandfather was in Monterrey, which is where my wife's family originates also. And so I'm very eager to go there and see Monterrey. But
it's a beautiful city, and it's where supposedly Elon Musk announced like a Tesla gigafactory there because there's good engineers. It's a good city, good environment. So
yeah. Okay, very cool. Well, hopefully I'll get to go there. So we actually had Eben from Ecovative on the show before. We will link to the show notes of that episode, so if people want to go listen to that back episode, you'll be able to see it at businessforgoodpodcast.com. But he has been very inspirational to so many people to getting involved in mycelium, including myself in many respects. And I'm eager to hear about why you went into and then went out of that. But first, let's just get into the company, because you're talking to your brother, you're thinking that you want to start something. What was you mentioned that you had an environmental sensitivity, right? You're worried about climate change, worried about other things relating to the planet. Did you have some animal welfare concern? Like, why leather? What was the reason that you were thinking you wanted to displace this one product?
That was part of it, certainly. As I told you, I was also very lucky that I found my vocation since I was very young. I've been a biologist since I was born, to be honest, because I didn't know it was called biology. But when I was a kid, I'm telling like 3 or 4 years old, I used to like reproduce or cultivate insects like beetles. I used to like feed them and have them in like big like tanks, like fish tanks, and all sorts of insects. I reproduced ants, beetles, and I had like a mini laboratory. Also, I was very lucky because my mother is a chemist. So my father a biochemist, my mother a chemist. So I grew up surrounded between like talks about technology and about like chemistry. And I played in my mom owns a laboratory, like a clinical testing, like blood testing and this kind of laboratory. So we used to play around with test tubes and syringes when we were like kids. So I think this definitely contributed to that. Of course, the animal welfare aspect, since being a biologist, also I had all sorts of pets you can imagine, like anywhere from like beetles, parrots, chickens, cats, dogs, of course, a lot of different pets. And this was an important factor, I think, for the doing leather, something that is more than competing with animal leather. What we want to do with Celium is a new class of material, let's say a new category, the future of materials for humanity in all sorts. This one is leather, but also cellulose is a very interesting material, Paul, because cellulose is the most abundant biopolymer on the planet. And we think that there is a reason for it. Like we think that Mother Nature is very intelligent and wise, and there's a reason why she chooses this scaffold for making all her creations, which you can see either in a jungle or a desert. Everything you look around that is a plant is made of cellulose, and it can be very versatile. For example, you can go into a forest or a jungle, and the bark of a tree, which is very strong, is cellulose with lignin, lignocellulose wood. But then if you combine cellulose with, let's say, pectin, you get something very hard like the husk of a seed, or the spike in an agave or a cactus, which is very strong and can penetrate the material. Or also you can combine cellulose with, let's say, a flavonoid or a color molecule to make a petal of a flower, which is very subtle, has color, smell, is very soft. So that's why we think that cellulose will be one of the key biological material commodities of the future.
What was it that led you then to think we can grow cellulose via some type of like microbial fermentation, right? So the idea behind this is essentially taking industrial fruit waste and feeding it to certain microbes that are going to produce cellulose. So what was the idea for actually making that the reality?
Yeah, so I don't know if you're familiar, but the first to actually propose making leather from bacterial cellulose is Suzanne Lee, who is a great friend of us now. Also, Evan is a great friend, and Gavin, we know them personally. They're good guys.
Yeah, and so I think, Suzanne Lee was at Modern Meadow.
Exactly. She was part of at some point, but before that, even she proposed like the biocouture thing, like 20 years ago, making leather with bacterial cellulose, and she was the first to actually propose that. And when we started with mycelium, and we knew already about this project from Suzanne, and we started to play with bacterial cellulose, we foresaw that has a lot of potential, and we thought that we could give it a try and be the first at that. And that's why we shifted from mycelium to cellulose, among other things that I'll get it deeper into later. But so yeah, I think that the reason is because it holds a lot of potential, and leather is just the first material that we can, let's say, supply, or a leather-like textile. But then, as I told you, cellulose is such a versatile material that there's so many applications already proven, either in literature or in actual materials that can be bought already, like cellulose. Bacterial cellulose can be used to make threads, to make cosmetic vehicles like powders for cosmetics, or even skin care products. It can be used to make grafting for skin grafts, or for like wound care, or even growing organs onto, or tissue engineering onto the cellulose, because it's a great scaffold for any kind of cell, actually.
When you began growing mycelium, were you doing solid state fermentation, or were you using bioreactors?
Solid state.
Right. And
Yep.
what was the reason to abandon mycelium to go to another form?
Yeah, so there were many factors. I'll, let's say, travel back in time a little. This was like, we started 2014, 2015, and we did mycelium for, let's say, 3 to 4 years, when we started doing in parallel cellulose. And while working on both, we foresaw like three main problems in mycelium. One, at that time, we were like, let's say, the fourth company doing mycelium. It was already Ecovative, Microworks already existed. Also, I think both threads had already pivoted to mycelium. I don't remember exactly, but there were 3 or 4 players already. And so we foresaw that mycelium was going to get crowded in terms of startups trying to do it, even though we were the first in Latin America and everything. But we foresaw that, and we said, at bacterial cellulose, we can be the first, because nobody has actually tried to tackle that. Suzanne proposed it, but nobody actually deployed an industrial operation for that. And so that was the first one, like being first. The second was mycelium has some technical difficulties. Either it's liquid or solid, as you mentioned. I can talk about the solid fermentation because I have experience in that. And is that it's, as you know, it's like particles, crushed particles of hay or straw that have to be transported into the molds and all this. And this is very challenging in terms of the machinery, and the engineering has to be made almost custom made, all the machinery, all the conveyors, the lines, because it has to be HEPA filters, suction, vacuum. All the systems are very expensive and have to be custom made compared to a liquid fermentation in bacterial cellulose, which is you use off the shelf equipment like fermenters for beer or for wine, and pumps that move liquid. So in that sense, in the scaling, it's faster, cheaper, easier. And the other one, it's more related to the last one, the biology of the cell. So mycelium, as you know, is more related to us than bacteria, because it's a complex cells, a eukaryote, compared to like very simple prokaryotic cells like archaea or bacteria. And if you see the history of our planet, actually this can be called the planet of bacteria, because they have outlived us for millions and millions of years, like 80% of the time that there's life in this planet. That is, the planet's 4,500 million years old, and then 80% of that life existed, and all that 80% of the time was bacteria. And just recently, like complex cells, our life arose, and that includes plants, mycelium, and us. And so in that regard, if you understand the biology of the cell, the mycelium or the fungal cell is very complex. First, it has a very tough cell wall, which makes it very complicated to do genetic engineering. That's why there is one of the least studied organisms or kingdoms for genetic engineering, fungi, because it's very hard to actually get DNA material inside. And then the other one is that it's slower. The cell division time, it's way slower compared to bacteria, and this makes it prone to contamination, which again affects yield, scaling, cost, and I think that all that sums up why we pivot from mycelium to cellulose.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that it didn't need as much sterility as, let's say, like a mycelial fermentation, that it can be done in like regular beer brewery equipment, which is less sterile than what you need for the type of equipment you need to grow mycelium. That's really interesting. Why the idea of using fruit waste? What type of fruit waste are you utilizing? Like, how did that come to be? Because most of these types of fermentations are just being run on, pure sugar, right? They're being run on glucose.
That is a great story. So I think that in that one, we could say that we were not the first to propose it, because people were growing nata de coco in Southeast Asia from coconut water a long time ago, but we were the first in the biomaterial startup space to propose making it circular. Like everybody else before us was like growing, if it was bacterial cell, it was from sugarcane. If it was mycelium, was hay or straw. That is not food waste, is more like a byproduct. And so we were the first to foresaw that. And the reason is the geography where we're located. As I told you, this has been an agro-industrial hub for thousands of years. Like before the Spanish, like this fed Mesoamerica. Like this is the richest soil in Mesoamerica, because it's like a high altitude plain. We're 1,700 meters, and it's a very long plain that encompasses 4 or 5 states in central Mexico. And it's a very rich soil because it comes from volcanic eruptions for thousands of years accumulated, and there's a clay layer that is very nutrient rich. And so this allows for a lot of agriculture. And in that sense, humans are very wasteful when we do agriculture everywhere. So to give you a little number, you might know 1/3 of the food we grow globally goes to the trash, but then fruits are even worse, because 50 to 60% of the fruits we grow go to the trash. And the problem is that they get to the trash even before the point of sale, like in the supply chain. Is that where the big mass of fruit is discarded, mainly because it's a material that has very short shelf life. If you don't process it quickly, it rottens and you have to throw it away. And so we foresaw that we were surrounded by these companies that package food in central Mexico. They call this also, it's an agricultural area, but it's an agro-industrial area, meaning there's like plants that process the food and package it and ship it to California, to New York, to Europe, to Asia. And they call it the refrigerator of Mexico, because it's the most conglomeration of like freezing operations and packaging operations that get frozen and sent frozen all the way to the supply chain, all the way to the supermarkets, wherever they are in the world. And so even though the fruit is not produced here, it's produced in the coast of Mexico, it gets here and it gets frozen and it gets processed here. And here is where the waste is produced, like huge amounts of waste. Just to give you like an idea, one of our partners, that there's like 300 of these companies. These are multinational companies. They're not even Mexican. Like the one we work with has 80 plants, like 80 plants all over the planet. It has 2 in Mexico. This is one of them. And they process like huge amounts of, they throw like 300, like this is like our operation for a year. Like, so we saw this waste and all this potential. Like we, instead of seeing waste, we see like gold, basically gold going to the trash, because it's sugar, like, and me as a biotechnologist, I was approached by one of these guys that they told me, like, I throw away all these waste. Can you do something with it? And he gave me a sample and I froze it and I left it in a freezer like for 3 or 4 years while I was doing the mycelium. And when I started doing the bacterial cell, I remember, and I was like, I have that sample frozen there. I can like check it out. And I tried growing it from waste, and it was not a straightforward thing. In the beginning, it's very complex to do it from only waste, because as you know, it doesn't have the form of sugar that you require and all that. So we have to do a little engineering. We actually developed 2 proprietary, let's say, processes. One is we can actually store the waste at room temperature up to 40 Celsius that gets here for 2 years, and it doesn't lose power, doesn't affect the process. And this was a process and a formula that we basically invented to do that.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, is that seems incredible that you can store fruit at 40 Celsius, which is over 100 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
for years without it degrading. So presumably you're removing all the oxygen from this whatever vessel it's in, and that's how you do it.
It's a combination of both the process and the formula. And so this enables us to do that, which, yeah, it sounds very fascinating and it's great for cost. Because imagine freezing all this material is very expensive.
Yeah.
So
What do you have to do then, Axel? To you've got your food waste, this fruit, but as you mentioned, it's not in the type of sugar that's going to make it so easily accessible in an efficient way to all of your bacteria. So is there an alpha amylase treatment? Is there some homogenization, or is there some type of way that you're breaking it down to make it easier for the bacteria to consume first? And if so, how does that affect the economics? You're putting in some cost to manipulate these fruits before they go into the system.
Yeah. So before I answer that, I would like to say that one of the things that is a very important value at Polybion is that resourcefulness. We believe in doing more with less in every respect. And in that sense, it's also taking inspiration from nature, because nature does a lot with just what it requires. Like, it never uses more than it needs. It does more with less. And that's what we strive for. And that's why every process that we design and execute in Polybion, the first thing we have in mind is efficiency and resourcefulness. Like, we will not do anything extra that is not needed. No over engineering. And so with that in mind, we designed this process that, as I told you, allows us to, it's both, it's a combination of the factors that you mentioned. So we have to stabilize the material, the waste. We do some treatment, but it's not an expensive treatment, let's say. And this allows us to be like, if I would to share with you the price economics of our, or the cost economics of our process, you would be amazed. It's a very efficient process in terms of cost because of two factors. One is that we always work with biology, not against it. Like, we let biology do its thing. It's the greatest technology that exists. We're just starting to understand how to use it. And that's the one thing. And the other is, of course, the location, the geography where we're based, abundance of waste, great qualified and compromised labor. That is, Mexicans have, I don't know if you knew this, but if you compare Mexican labor to Chinese labor, we actually surpass them now in terms of skillful with the hands and cost, of course. Like, we're per dollar, we are better than the Chinese now. So it's a great geography to do biofabrication. And that's what we figured. And that's why we are still here.
Yeah, amazing. And is the fruit waste free, or are these companies, because they have to dispose of it anyway? So does Polybion get this waste, the feedstock, for free?
It's a great point. So the thing with the waste, it's a huge problem. We're just solving a huge thing just by using it. And the problem is that these guys actually pay to get the waste out. Because imagine, like, if you have a mango packaging facility that processes 300 tons per week or even more, these guys have a problem with the waste. They need to take it out every day. They discard like 6 cubic meter trucks per day of waste, just of waste. And they have to take it out every like 6 hours or 4 hours, because otherwise the operation stops. Like, they need to take out the waste. So they pay for companies, basically landfill operators, to take the waste to the landfill. And the bad thing, or the good thing for us, is that these waste cannot be used in any other way. It's not like hay or straw that you can feed to the cows. If you feed this to the cows, they die. They basically burst because there's so much sugar in their stomachs that they die. So you cannot feed this to any animal. You cannot compost it, because in Mexico there's 0 composting facilities. Industrial composting, there is none here. And the only way is either landfill, which is a bad because generates methane, but it's better than the other. They actually burn it sometimes, because if there's so much, they make piles and they burn it, like, because there's no other thing to do. So that's the great thing about the process we basically invented, or the supply chain, which is take this waste that is waste for some people and make it into gold, like Midas used to do, King Midas. So by doing this, we're solving different problems. One is we're solving the waste for our partners, that they throw away the waste. And we sometimes, as I told you, get paid to get it out, as it was a waste disposal service. And this also has benefits for LCA, for the way you can register your company and your operation as an actual landfill or waste management facility, that helps with a lot of incentives from the government. But that's only like the 10% of the process. We haven't even get into the facility, and we're already solving all these problems for these guys.
That's really impressive, Axel. That's really impressive. Let's talk about quickly the process. So you're feeding the fruit waste to the bacteria and making this product that is a leather-like product. We want to talk about how long does it take? And then what is this product? So you're saying it's not a perfect mimicry of leather, but that it's a new type of material that might be able to replace leather. So how long does it take? How long are these bacteria consuming fruit before they turn into celium? And what is the celium good for?
So the process starts with we call it waste carbon because that's what it is. It's carbon in the end, and people see it as waste. It becomes methane in a landfill, but you can use the carbon put it into this system, and then it gets captured into the cellulose that you can see here, the raw cellulose. So the process to get the cellulose takes anywhere from 5 to 10 days, depending on the thickness we want. This already, it's a huge improvement. In the beginning, when we started, to give you an idea, 3 years ago, when we started operating the Folk, the first of a kind facility we have, is the first biomanufacturing facility for bacterial cellulose textiles on the planet at this scale that uses waste. And when we started, the process was 15 to 30 days, depending if it's high thickness or low thickness. We have two, let's say, thickness of the material that we produce, but now it's 5 to 10. So this tells you about the improvisation, like the improvement that we were able to pull off. And this has to do with both the process, genetic engineering that I can get deeper into that we're already doing. And so 5 to 10 days, depending if it's thin or thick leather, and it's waste, as you can imagine, is like a slurry of mango waste, basically. There's sugar contained in there. We do the process that I told you is proprietary. We basically make it bioavailable for the bacteria and make a huge like soup of food for bacteria. Let's say convert the waste into food for bacteria. This is done in a reactor that we have, a conventional stainless steel. Right now it's 3,000 liter. It's a batched process. Let's say we can make 3,000 liters per day, or even 6,000 if we want. And so we convert the waste to this liquid medium, and it's a proprietary formula. And then the magic there is using only waste, because you could use a little sugar, and that's not great for the LCA. But the difficulty and the great thing when you solve it is only waste. It took us 4 years to develop the process and the formula. After that, we pump this into a rack. It's a vertical system, very similar to ecovatives or indoor farming systems, as you might see these systems for biofabrication. It grows, we harvest it, and we get this, which is the raw. You can see it's like a piece of meat that you've seen, like the kombucha kind of thing. And yeah, that's the first part of the process.
Amazing. So yeah, for folks who are listening, so Axel is just showing a piece of the celium, looks like maybe half of a square meter of it or so. And the question I have is about the material itself. So you've created this cellulosic material that can be used as a leather alternative. Is that your main goal, to replace leather on shoes and car seats and bags and wallets and belts? Or is there something else also that you're thinking about doing with this?
Yeah. That's just the first step, I would say. Leather, the most obvious, the first to market, because we've been doing it for so long. But no, we're thinking about a plethora of markets and applications. Just to give you a few, that these you can Google them, and there's already a lot of proof of concept in literature and in academia and in other places. We want to actually tackle several markets as we scale and we get to price parity with incumbent commodities. The obvious next one will be cosmetics. You can use this raw bacterial cellulose for a cosmetic, wound care material. You can make it into powder for powder cosmetics, vehicles for a cream. It's a great vehicle for active ingredients in cosmetics, because it has a lot of, since it's at the nanoscale, the thread, it's a great vehicle to get the products into the skin or into the wound. If it's a wound care product, a clinical product, of course, we can also make this with this a thread, and with the thread you can make either clinical suture, for stitching, or actual clothes, with any thread, or to make the leather bags with the not only the bacterial cellulose leather, but the thread to confection or to create the products. And others in the future, more long term, in 10 years, when this reaches a price parity with a commodity, we can make paper and pulp products, like paper, cardboard, even growing wood eventually, because it's lignocellulose, if you think of it. So yeah, we're thinking about a lot of industries.
Incredible. Axel, how much money have you all raised so far for the company?
Around $6 million since we started.
And how has it been raising in Mexico? You mentioned earlier, you were talking about in the 1980s when there was no entrepreneurialism or venture capital activity in Mexico, but presumably that is not the case today. So are you primarily raising from Mexican VCs, from American VCs, European, Asian? Like, where's the money for Polybion coming from?
So we closed the Series A round with a Swiss fund, a Zurich-based fund called Blue Horizon. So the money is from Switzerland. That was the Series A. Before that, were only angel investors from Mexico. So the thing with VC in markets or industry in Mexico is that it's very young. Like it's honestly doesn't exist, only for specific trending things like fintech was before, now AI. But honestly, the VCs in Mexico only follow whatever VCs in Europe or the US do. And they're very small, of course, in terms of the capital that they have available. And that was bad in the beginning, but it was also good because it was very difficult for us to get funding from VCs. So we lived off of grants and awards, international awards. We won a lot of awards, one from MIT, from Mass Challenge, a lot of different awards, and of course government grants. We got federal Mexican government grants. And this was hard in the beginning because you don't get as much money and you have to do all the administration of the money, and it gets complex. But also it was great in retrospective because it allowed us to own 70% of the stock of the company today. Like we owned 90 before the Series A. So
we meaning the co-founders.
Yeah, the co-founders, me and my brother. Yeah,
that's great. And how many employees are there?
Right now we're 30 people.
It's amazing. It's a really incredible because $6 million, of course, is a lot of money. But when you think about these biotech startups, it's very little money.
Yeah, it's like,
and so right, exactly. And so when you get to, if you're looking at American startups that have raised 6 million, the idea that they would have 30 employees seems pretty far-fetched, right? Especially if they're doing biotech, because there's a lot of important capex that needs to be done. And I presume that is because things are much cheaper to do in Mexico. Is that right?
Not only that, we're very resourceful, as I told you. We're very smart in how we use the money. Like, we're very cautious. We're very smart. We take it step by step. We don't overpromise and underdeliver. The contrary, we underpromise and always overdeliver. Right. We promise we'll build a facility in 3 years. We build it in 1, and we've been operating it for 2. So it's a combination of everything. It's like, if you think about like Twitter or what now is X, the limitation makes creativity. Like if you're limited to a number of characters, you get creative how you write, right? So this is the same. We have too much abundance, you get lazy and you start like you don't use that much the brain to like, how can I make this with half the money? Like, like
I have heard and talked about many times that a lot of these companies that raise these mega rounds are not always the ones that succeed because they are so fat, so to speak, that they get a little bit content. They get content. So you launched in 2024 with Celium on the market. Before we get to who these first customers are, it's bacterial, not mycelial. So why is it called Celium? Yeah,
because cellulose. It's a great question, and we sometimes get it. The word mycelium actually comes from cellulose, because back when they discovered mycelium for the first time using microscope, biologists thought it was like a mycocellulose because that's what it looked like a cellulose from microorganisms. So that's why it was called mycelium.
Oh, what an interesting piece of historical trivia. Mycocellulose. Okay.
Yeah,
okay. Well, that blows my mind hearing that.
From cellulose, and "ium," or the terminology, the suffix from Latin describing an element or an entity, like any element in the periodic chart, and that's where. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe one day there'll be like a polybiesium or something for some material that you guys create. That'll be the next thing on the periodic table.
Yeah, maybe.
I usually don't tell periodic table jokes, but I feel like I'm out of my element doing it. Okay. So who are the first customers for Celium? You've launched in 2024. You have this factory. You've actually commercialized a product. Who's buying this stuff?
So the first, let's say, commercial and the only one that's public now, it's Gani. This is a Danish brand from Denmark, owned by Nicola Roofstrop and Dite Roofstrop, great guys also. They're partners in that startup. LVMH bought Gani like 5 years ago, or 50% of it. So it's an upcoming brand in the fashion world. It started like a small brand. It's been growing. It's one of the fastest growing brands for fashion in the planet. And they're very brave. They operate like a tech company, and it's the only fashion brand that operates like that we know of. So very fast, they're very brave. But they believe in the Jeff Bezos ethos of move fast and break things. And we believe that too. So that's why we've been working with them. They're great. And we launched a couple of products now, like released a jacket, then a boo bag, which is their signature bag models. And yeah, the next year you can buy them off the shelf, which is a great thing.
How can somebody get a Celium jacket now, right? So they're selling Celium jackets. If somebody wants to be in the coolest new fashion, they want Celium jackets, where are they going?
So first, you should go to Paris in October for the Paris Fashion Week, and you'll see a lot of products that will be announced at that event. Is going to be a gala, a very interesting proposal from Gani. There's a lot of things prepared that are boiling. I cannot say anything yet, but you can see it in October in Paris. And after that, you can buy them next year because they will announce the collection for next year with this runway. And that's how you can get them next year. You can buy them in Gani stores. And this would be, if this is confirmed and it's announced and everything, then it will be the first biofabricated leather product on the planet, because all of the others are just announced and there's no, like, you cannot buy anything. Like, you cannot buy any micro material. Yeah.
Yeah, this has been a real pain point for me because, you have companies, let's say like Modern Meadow, which have existed for well over a decade and to my knowledge are still pre-revenue. And I think they were started even 2009, if my memory is correct.
Yeah,
Bolt Threads essentially abandoned that work to my knowledge. I think they're focused on the spider silk again. MycoWorks has this factory in South Carolina. I don't know if they're selling from it yet. And so not yet. Okay. So a lot of these companies, that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars are still pre-revenue. So it's a testament to what you're doing with $6 million that you'll be on the market. So fingers crossed that you get to be the first on the market. We'll see if somebody else comes out before you. But so I live in Sacramento where there's, 40C is like our normal fare. So having a jacket is not as important for me. But if there's a Celium belt or something like that, I hope one day to be wearing that.
Yeah, well, I usually go also to Berkeley. My older brother lives there in Berkeley, so we usually go 2-3 times a year. So next time I'll go to Sacramento and say hi.
Okay, I would be honored. Yes.
Looking back to your point is that the reason why you see all these cases of money not well spent, let's say, there's two possibilities: either they made a bonfire with the money, or they didn't spend it well. I'm gonna give you my perspective, which is that there's a great quote from Carlos Slim. Carlos Slim is the richest man in Latin America and the richest in Mexico too. He says that an engineer is one who makes something with 1 peso, whereas the non-engineer makes it with 2 pesos. So what it means is that basically that's what the engineer, like, that's what engineers should do. Like, that's your thing, like, make it cheaper, make it faster, make it better. And that's what I see missing in a lot of these startups in this space. They're lacking engineers, honestly. Not a Coveted, that's not the case. Those are great engineers, and I admire these guys. They're actually the first to scale mycelium. And so I think this is one of the key things I see over and over again in these startups, that there is no engineers and no biologists. Like, many of the startups, man, were founded by designers, which is great. They have great perspective and great ideas, but then you have to actually need hard science to know if the idea actually makes sense or it breaks the laws of physics, like. So I see this happening again and again. I think that's one of the things why Polybion has been able to do what it has done with so little resources.
It's definitely impressive how much you've done with so few resources, and time will tell whether they have not spent their money well or not. These other companies haven't gone under yet, right? So they may end up having big jackpots at the end of this.
We hope they, like we all do, like, there's room for everyone, and every time a startup of this goes on, that happens, like, I think twice now, it's bad for everybody. Like,
yeah, for sure.
The system goes, and it's bad for everyone. We hope everybody does great, like, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. My view of this is, first of all, it's horrible for the entire ecosystem when somebody fails, because it depresses interest in the VC community for this space. It's bad because there was a mission that didn't get fulfilled to try to help the planet in that particular case. And, it's bad for the individuals who are involved. It's really terrible. They had employees and investors
Yeah.
and so on who lost out. So for sure. And there's more of these closures that are happening now and bankruptcies that are happening that are very distressing. And hopefully from the ashes of this winter that has been going on in the like biotech, both materials and food space, there'll be some phoenixes that rise and do very well. Toward that end, Axel, let me ask you if there are companies that you think somebody else should be starting. So obviously you're focused on making Celium right now, but I presume as a biologist since birth, now you've been a biologist for several decades, is there something that you wish that somebody else would do that could have some positive impact in the world that you don't see happening?
Yeah. I am very happy about the future, very positive. I think, as you mentioned, these, let's say, cleanse of, it's a bubble like it happened with the dot-com era. The ones who survive will make great things for humanity. I think it's needed for the planet, and more for the planet than for humans. Like, the planet will be okay. If we make mistakes in our civilization, we will perish, but the planet will be fine. So that's why I think I'm very happy about the future. And I think biology is such a great technology. As I told you, we just started, like, we think we understand DNA, but we don't understand DNA. Like, we've been playing with it for 40, 50 years since Crick discovered or predicted the double helix. But honestly, we don't know exactly what DNA is. Like 98% doesn't code for anything. I don't think so. That's why I'm very happy about the future, because I think the new generation, I see every time, like, I participate in events, they invite me as like a judge for like accelerators and things. And I see that the new generation is more like, they're understanding that they need to get into biology. Like, this is the thing we need to do as a species it's the next wave of technology, I think, and combining it with of course, AI and humanoids, that will be like something very crazy. So I'm very happy about the future, honestly. And I think there's so many things that we need to fix at once if we want to make it fast enough for 2030 or to say, or 2050, let's say, to save us from ourselves. That I think that these new generations will solve everything. And I'm telling about that we need to solve materials, of course. Leather is just a tiny, tiny material, like concrete, steel. We need to solve logistics. We need to solve energy. We need to solve like so many challenges for the civilization to keep existing at this quality of life or higher, without continuing to destruct and to emit carbon. That I think that the only solution will and is biology. But also I'm very eager that these new generations will create the technologies and the startups and the organizations required to deploy biology worldwide, let's say.
For sure. Yeah, I share your optimism on that for harnessing technology, especially biology, to try to create a better future. I do worry, like I agree with you that even if human civilization perishes, the planet will go on. But, in the process, we're taking out enormous numbers of other species who are going extinct. And so, there will be other species that rise in the future, but it does seem like quite a shame that, the problems that humanity has created don't just affect humanity. They are affecting thousands of other species as well.
Yeah, we're very selfish in that regard. That's the only way I could describe it. Yeah, it has happened before, as you know, like there's been mass extinctions before, and it all creates new niches that will be filled with new evolutionary creations. But it's a pity to lose these great.
Yeah, it is, especially like, if it feels different to me, like if an asteroid creates a mass extinction, it feels different to me when one animal on the planet is the new asteroid, like when human activity, and it's, the dinosaurs didn't have a space program. There's no way for them to deflect the asteroid. Whereas we know what we need to do. Like we know that we need to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels, off of animal-based agriculture. Like these are the things that we can do to prevent us from creating that mass level extinction stuff that's already underway.
It's a challenge, man. It's a challenge to explain this to people, because I've been trying to do it since I was a kid. But the thing with this is, or at least my understanding until now, or my conclusion at this period in my life, is that the reason why it's so hard to do it is because people do not see it immediately, the consequence. Like, it's not like if you get hit, you get hurt, like it hurts. But if you like emit carbon, you don't see it until next generation. You will not see it. Like, that's why it's so hard to make a change in your behavior, because basically you do not see the consequences of your action in terms of climate or killing extinct animals. Like you don't see it. So that's why it's so hard.
Yeah, indeed. And especially even if you did see it, the consequences are borne by a lot of these other animals who are not in our immediate consciousness anyway. With that said, are there resources, Axel, that you think that have been useful for you that you'd recommend for others? Any books or other resources that you hope somebody else might benefit from?
Yeah. Before that, I would like to also add to your previous question, which is what other startups. I honestly, I don't have a lack of ideas. I have a lack of execution. Like there's just so much execution you can do. Ideas, I have like a list. Like I don't have enough life to make so much startups. But one that is very important, I think, is plastics. Like we need to solve for plastics, and it's important to understand that plastics are a very diverse group of material. Like it's not polypropylene is very different from high density polyethylene. Like every plastic is a different universe, a whole new material. That's why saying plastic is a very like confusing term, because you should say like very different materials. Like one for making plastic bags is completely different from making hard plastics, from making thermo fixed plastics. Like and that's why it needs to be approached in this like per case scenario in terms of the biological design for the material. And if we do that, we like this is a problem we need to solve, like plastic, because plastics are great, man. Like for imagine all the clinical material, the syringes, all this material that is sterile. Like there's no other ways to do it without plastic. Like there's so many applications that are great for plastic. So we need to solve these two very fast.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I've thought a lot about is even if we stopped making plastic today, there still is so much plastic in the world that won't degrade for centuries, presumably, that ways to degrade plastic would be extremely helpful. And there are many different fungi species that are happy to consume plastic. And as a result, I've thought, like, why doesn't somebody, like, whatever enzyme fungi are excreting to digest plastic, maybe we could synthesize that, right? Maybe there's a way to actually, mass produce that enzyme and create something. And it's kind of like carbon in the sense that even if we stopped emitting CO2 and methane today, there's so much in the atmosphere that we have to remove it. Like we have to remove it. And the same is with plastic. Like we need to get rid of this plastic. So I hope somebody will start a company on plastic degradation. So it'd be great to create new plastics that are more environmentally friendly than the current generation. But what an amazing thing that would be to have a fungal degradation fungal plastic degradation factory. Wouldn't that be a great thing?
You see the paper came out like last week or 2 weeks ago about that, basically the mushroom that can degrade, has enzymes. Before Japanese had discovered this bacteria that lived in a landfill that also eat plastic. The problem is the efficiency at which you need to do it so that it makes sense to make a growth media from plastic. I think that's where the thing will be, the efficiency of the enzyme. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't see this. I'll look for it. And if I find that, I'll include it in the show notes for this episode at businessforgoodpodcast.com. But finally, Axel, what resources, aside from that paper that you just mentioned, what resources should people check out that if they're thinking, oh, I really admire what Axel has done here with Polybion, I want to do something cool like that also, what should they check out?
So some books that helped me a lot, I'm going to talk from a bioengineer perspective. I'm sorry, because that's what my experience has been. So one book that was great for me was while I was growing and becoming an engineer is called Microcosmos from Lynn Margulis. Lynn Margulis was the wife of Carl Sagan, and she invented the endosymbiosis theory, which basically explains how complex cells or eukaryotes came about from single cell organisms in stromatolites in ancient seas. But more important, that gives you the perspective of the microcosm, like or like Richard Feynman used to say, there's plenty of room at the bottom. Meaning, like as I told you, we don't understand, like we don't understand so few about the universe and DNA and physics, that this book is great to get you into perspective that this is just a tiny, like we're so tiny in the universe, like we don't even like matter that much, like we're just, or as Carl Sagan used to say, like we're the pale blue dot, like the fraction of a pixel in the picture, like the one they took from our solar system, that it's like a pale blue pixel in the picture, that's Earth, and we're just like, even a country is just a fraction of the pixel. So this gets you into perspective, and also biological perspective of the macrocosm, the microcosm. And so yeah, I think that one is a great book to give you a very generalized perspective not very technically deep enough so that you can read it very like casually. And it's a great perspective for understanding how life arose on this planet, how complex life arose, and what is life in that regard, in the sense of the macro scale, the macrocosm and the microcosm, and where do we are in between those two universes, humans, and how can we help the universe, basically. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I will link to Microcosmos in the show notes for this episode as well. It looks like a really great book. I've read so many Sagan books, and I'm such a huge Sagan fan that when you walk into the lobby of my company, we have a gigantic portrait of Carl Sagan in the lobby. That's the first thing that you get treated with. So I'm a huge fan. I came so close to meeting him in 1996. I was going to a conference. It was an animal protection conference that he was speaking at. And sadly, he had cancer and he could not make the talk, but his wife, Andrian, did go and give the talk. So I got to meet her at least. And she was a co-author with him on many books and did some really cool things as well. So I'm at least I got to meet her, which is a real honor for me. Are there other books or other resources, Axel, or is Microcosmos the book that you're recommending?
That one is a great one. More than books, I would like, again, from my perspective, from an engineer, let's say, there's a great Mexican engineer that existed a long time ago, which he's like an inspiration for me. It was Carlos González Camarena, and this guy actually invented color TV. Many people don't know this, but this guy invented the trichromatic system, meaning RGB, right? Or red, green, and blue for like what makes LEDs, basically color TV. And the interesting story about this guy is that he made it with vacuum tubes, and then Americans and Japanese basically made a very similar system using like not analogic but digital system, which is what basically created the actual technology that was the first color TVs. But then this guy González Camarena system, since it was a vacuum system, it could be used in space, and the Apollo transmissions actually used his patent and his system, because it was not digital, it was analog and could be used in space. But the interesting thing about this guy is that he made this as we made Polybion. He made it from scrap parts from a landfill in Mexico City. He used like washing machines and TVs that were thrown away, collected all these pieces because he didn't have budget to buy the pieces. And he basically made like a Frankenstein that led to his first system. He also founded the first channel like in TV in Mexico, like the first TV channel, let's say. Canal 5 is now owned by Televisa, but he was the founder of that. So yeah, I think that for me is a great character to follow, great engineer.
And tell me again his name. I say his name one more time so we can make sure we include a link to him here.
Yeah, Carlos González Camarena. I can write it for you if you...
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at him. I don't know if this is the same gentleman. Might he also be Guillermo González Camarena?
Yes. I mean, his brother. His brother was a painter, also very famous. But
interesting. Okay. Very cool. We'll include that. Thank you very much. And Axel, it is a real pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for your important work. There are cows all over the world who are grateful to you for what you're doing to literally save their skin. And I can't wait to see the Polybion Celium for sale across the world. And we'll all be wearing really cool shoes, belts, wallets, jackets, car seats, and everything made from your bacterial cellulose.
Thank you, Paul. Gracias.
Thanks for listening. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, please let the world know. Leave the show a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app and share the episode with your friends. Who knows? Maybe you'll inspire one of them to be in the business of doing good themselves.